Hey, it's Rick Kettner here, and today we're going to go through the 5 books that I read in August 2022. I'll talk a little bit about why I chose these books and what you can expect to get out of them. That way you can decide whether or not they are relevant to you. Let's begin with book number 1. Mistakes Were Made, But Not By Me. Why We Justify Foolish Beliefs, Bad Decisions, and Hurtful Acts by Tavris and Elliot Aronson. This book is about our tendency to avoid admitting mistakes even to ourselves, and it explores how we tend to come up with self-justifications and rationalizations and other mental tricks to avoid admitting or even recognizing when we make mistakes. Now, much of this comes down to the idea of cognitive dissonance. This is the uncomfortable feeling of holding two conflicting ideas in our mind at the same time. For example, let's say that you're trying to live a healthy and a fit lifestyle, and at the same time, you've somehow found yourself eating an unhealthy snack. Well, what we tend to do in this kind of situation is we come up with rationalizations for why, despite the fact that we want to be healthy and eat healthy, and yet we have cravings for unhealthy food, we try to rationalize this to resolve our cognitive dissonance. So for example, we might tell ourselves, well, this was just a one-off. I just had to have this unhealthy snack this one time, then we're gonna get right back to eating healthy. Or for example, we might justify it by saying, well, I had a busy week. It was a stressful week. Maybe eating this unhealthy snack is actually good for me because it's gonna, renew my energy and kind of compensate for the rough week that I had. Now, another core theme in the book is confirmation bias. And this is our tendency to seek out evidence that supports our existing beliefs or our existing views on a subject. Now, oftentimes it feels like we are doing objective research. We're just gathering the facts, gathering information so that we can improve the way that we think about things. But more often than not, what we are really doing is we're focusing on information that proves our existing views correct. So we're only really taking in information that lends credibility to what it is that we want to be true or what we already believe to be true. And in some cases, even when we come across contradictory information, we will view that information in a different light, or we will manipulate it, or we'll go through mental gymnastics to somehow use that new information in a way that actually lends support and credibility to our existing view, even if, objectively, the information suggests we may be wrong. We just find some way to reinterpret the information. We maybe introduce some sense of conspiracy or something like that, and we find a way to take that information and actually make it strengthen our existing views, even when in reality, it should cause us to pause and reconsider our position. Now, the book goes on to cover many other related topics, including the shortcomings of our memory, the ways in which self-justification hurts us, and how we can take better responsibility of our actions, plus the many benefits of doing so. So if, like me, you're interested in understanding why we justify our mistakes and what we can do about it to live a better life, consider reading Mistakes Were Made, But Not By Me by Tavris and Elliot Aronson. Book number 2, Think Like a Rocket Scientist. Simple strategies you can use to make giant leaps in work and life by Ozan, Varol. This book is about how to view the world through the lens of a rocket scientist. It covers 9 powerful principles for how to take on seemingly impossible outcomes. Now, the author of the book is a former rocket scientist who worked on the Mars Exploration Rover mission. And so many of the insights in the book include examples of how teams at NASA would think differently to overcome challenges and ultimately achieve success. Now, as I was going through this book, especially in the first half, I found myself thinking, who is this book really for? Who is the ideal target audience? And what I concluded is this book is ideal for anyone who is trying to take on more ambitious goals in their life. So that might include entrepreneurs, especially aspiring entrepreneurs, but even more experienced entrepreneurs. It would also include leaders, product teams, inventors, anyone who wants to kind of take their ambition to the next level and wants to understand the different challenges and obstacles that they're going to have to deal with in order to do so successfully. So, for example, Some of the things covered in this book include dealing with uncertainty, using first principles thinking, reframing challenges, learning from failures, avoiding complacency, and many other related topics. So if you're interested in thinking differently about taking on more ambitious goals or trying to accomplish more ambitious outcomes, consider picking up a copy of Think Like a Rocket Scientist by Ozan Varol. Book number 3, Good Economics for Hard Times. Better Answers to Our Biggest Problems by Abhijit Banerjee and Esther Duflo. This book aims to address some of the many challenges being faced by modern economies, including things like slowing economic growth, income inequality, climate change, technological disruption, and challenges with globalization. Now, the solutions presented in the book are based on recent advancements in economic theory, and in some cases, simply a recognition of a lack of understanding or a lack of clarity relating to certain issues. For example, very little is truly understood when it comes to understanding or what causes sustained economic growth. Now, one of my favorite insights from the book has to do with the idea of raising taxes on the rich and the very popular misconception that doing so is simply about raising additional money for the government. What's interesting about this policy is it also has an unusual impact on productivity, and that's because when you make changes to tax policy, it actually influences the career choices of certain people. Now, when many people choose their career, the kinds of things that tend to guide their choices can be either intrinsic or extrinsic. So, for example, intrinsic motivators for career choice might come down to wanting to make a difference in the world, wanting to work with incredible people, wanting to build an important product. Maybe you're an entrepreneur and you want to hire and be able to work with highly talented people. Those are intrinsic motivators. Then, for example, you might have extrinsic motivators, which very commonly would be simply wanting to earn more money or to raise your status or your stature in the world. And oftentimes, these extrinsic motivators are heavily influenced by things like the highest marginal tax rate. Now, for those of you unfamiliar with marginal tax rates, the idea here is pretty simple. In fact, you've probably heard of this before, but the idea is as you earn more money, you enter different tax brackets. So for example, on your first $100,000 that you earn, you might have a tax rate of, let's say, 25%, just for round numbers' sake. But if you were to earn over $1 million, any money earned above that specific threshold could be taxed at a much higher tax rate, for example, 90%. In fact, at one point in the U.S.'s history, from 1944 to 1963, the highest marginal tax rate was above 90%. And just to be completely clear here, that percent wouldn't apply to your total income. It would only apply to the income that surpassed a specific threshold. Now, one way in which this impacts the productivity of the economy is how it affects career choices. So for example, let's take a fictional example of a brilliant mind graduating from Harvard. Well, if they know that the highest marginal tax rate is going to be at 90%, and so any money they earn, let's say over $1 million, is going to be taxed at 90%, well, they're far less likely to play it safe and take up a career in finance where they aren't necessarily contributing a great deal to the productivity of the economy, but they have the potential to earn $5 or $10 million a year. Well, if they know that most of that money is going to be taxed at 90%, then they have to rethink just how important are those extrinsic motivators versus the intrinsic motivators of taking a risk, starting an interesting venture, getting to work with interesting people, building a dream business, building a fantastic product, and perhaps building the next Apple, Google, or Microsoft of the future. Now, to make matters worse, oftentimes these kind of safe, high-paying jobs involve helping companies make short-sighted decisions where they'll go into a company and they'll cut the labor force and they'll pull investments from long-term opportunities. They'll focus almost exclusively on improving quarterly performance and quarterly profits, usually at the detriment to the long-term potential of the company. And so they come in, they make a small fortune by just cutting costs left and right and sacking a bunch of workers, and then eventually the company fails or fails to keep up with changes in the economy because of these changes, because of these cuts, because of a lack of long-term thinking, and yet these individuals made a fortune that was taxed at a lower rate and they were incentivized to take these jobs all because of these incentives, and it's actually detrimental to the productivity of the overall economy. Anyway, the book is about so much more than this one insight that just happened to jump out at me. So if you're interested in learning more about some of the real challenges that economies all around the world are facing right now and potential solutions, consider reading Good Economics for Hard Times by Abhijit Banerjee and Esther Duflo. Book number 4, Upgrade by Blake Crouch. Now, while I primarily read nonfiction books, I do like to mix in some fiction books from time to time, especially science fiction books that have some kind of a plausible element to them, because I tend to find that they help me think differently about emerging technologies and business opportunities and just the future in general. And so this book is a science fiction thriller, I think you could describe it as. This book's theme is genetic engineering. In other words, the potential for us to modify the human genome to upgrade certain capabilities of ourselves as human beings. Now, of course, the story itself is entirely fictional. It's entertaining. It's a fun read. But what I most enjoy about these kinds of books, in addition to the entertainment factor, is just this opportunity to think about what the future might hold. And while some of these technologies may never come to fruition, some of the ideas discussed in the book may just never happen, it's still fascinating to think about them from a thought experiment perspective and just think, what might the world be like in 10, 20, or 30 years? What challenges will emerge? What opportunities might come up? What business opportunities might come up? And just having the mental exercise to go through and think about, how likely is this? How unlikely is this? What would I do in that kind of a scenario? It's just a fantastic way to think about the future and to have the norms of our everyday lives challenged in an interesting way. So if, like me, you're interested in reading a great fiction book that causes you to think differently about the future, consider picking up Upgrade, or better yet, consider reading Recursion or Dark Matter, 2 other fantastic fiction books by author Blake Crouch. Book number 5, The Boy Crisis: Why Our Boys Are Struggling and What We Can Do About It, by Warren Farrell and John Gray. This book is about how boys growing up today are struggling to find purpose and support in a rapidly changing world. Now, in many ways, girls are doing better than ever, and that, of course, is a very good thing. But unfortunately, many boys today are facing new and unique challenges that are causing them to fare much worse relative to the past. Now, the authors of this book dive into 4 specific challenges that boys are facing today: a crisis of education, a crisis of physical health, a crisis of economic health, and a crisis of mental health. Together, these issues are contributing to what is described in the book as a purpose void, in which young men are struggling to achieve a sense of self-worth. One of the central causes of many of the issues covered in this book is a lack of great father figures in the lives of young men. And this can be due to a variety of factors, including increased divorce, abandonment, and in some cases, even incarceration. Now, of course, these things also affect young girls, but the data suggests that the impact of missing out on a great father figure is far more impactful and even devastating for young boys. Now, of course, there are many other factors at play, and the book goes on to cover a wide range of them. So if, like me, you're interested in understanding why boys are struggling to find purpose and support today and what we can do to reverse the trend, consider picking up a copy of The Boy Crisis by Warren Farrell and John Gray. Anyway, those are the 5 books that I read in August 2022. Click the like button and subscribe to the channel if you want more updates like this again in the future.